So today we're going to answer your questions about the PPP, EIDL, and stimulus check programs, otherwise known as economic impact payments. We have a list of questions we want to go through. We're going to be doing those by category. And additionally, people have been sending us a lot of great questions through email, so we're going to be addressing some of those as well. So for the Q&A, I want to start with the EIDL. Most questions we get do revolve around this, and believe it or not, we probably get more questions about EIDL than we do about stimulus checks. The first question that we're going to answer here has been sent in by a lot of people, so we want to make sure we go through this, which is, can you apply for EIDL if you don't currently have a business account? Now, the answer to this question is obviously going to be contingent on whether or not you can apply for EIDL at all, but generally speaking, yes. The EIDL as well as the payroll protection programs were actually opened up to contractors and the self-employed. So contractors and self-employed people may receive 1099 income that's issued to their social security number. These people don't necessarily have an LLC, they don't necessarily have a corporation, they're not necessarily a company, they're just a self-employed contractor. That said, this relief was opened up to them. So if you don't have a business bank account, you just have one under your personal name, and you're getting 1099 income under your personal name, then yeah, you can apply using your social security number as well as your personal bank account. Now, that's going to lead me into my next question, and this one's going to be a bit of a doozy because the question here really is whether or not you can apply for EIDL at all. The portal on the SBA website to actually apply for an economic injury disaster loan has been closed for well over a week now. So we're currently filming this on April 28th, which is a Tuesday. The week of April 20th, we actually saw another stimulus bill get signed into law. This is actually round 4. And the main purpose of this bill was to get additional funding for small business relief, more than anything else. Even though we have additional funding for EIDL and payroll protection now, the portal to actually apply for economic injury disaster loans and grants is still closed. As of this time, it says on the SBA website that they'll be bringing an update on reopening the portal as soon as possible. The reality of the situation is that they actually ran out of funding long before they got through all the original applications. So now that they have more funding, they can process more of the additional applications that still have not received any of that loan advance that was originally, remember, supposed to be issued within 3 days. So there's people who have been waiting for weeks and haven't gotten anything from EIDL yet. No loan offers, no updates on their application, and definitely no loan advance. So right now the SBA is using these additional funds to process existing applications and get that money to the people who already applied. This money was always going to be first come, first serve, and it goes without saying that there's going to be more demand for this than our government could ever fund. So if you haven't already applied for EIDL, but you're really committed that you want to, it might pay to actually watch the SBA website on a daily basis, bookmark it in your browser, and check it once or twice a day. When it reopens, get your application in ASAP. Some things you could have prepared ahead of time. They are going to ask some questions about your income and expenses, so if you have some financial reports prepared, that's going to help you to have that information ready. They're also going to want to have information such as social security number, business name, and if applicable. And when you apply, you want to make sure the information you're putting in matches what the government has on record. So if you do have a business and you're going to apply for an EIDL when the portal reopens, if it reopens, you want to make sure that the business name that you're applying under matches what you would put on your tax return, and that information should match what you originally filed with the IRS when you created your EIN, as well as the paperwork you got from the state when you created your business. Now, the next question we're going to answer has to do with the actual loan advance, and I've done plenty of other content talking about this, so I don't want to spend too much time on it. But the loan advance was something that was introduced with the CARES Act. That was round 3 of the stimulus. That was the specific bill that gave us this streamlined SBA application portal. Before that bill was passed, the process to actually apply for any SBA loan was a lot more standard. There were a bunch of forms that had to be filled out. Originally you were supposed to provide tax returns depending on your entity type, stuff like that. That all got kind of pushed aside and a lot of the requirements were suspended prior to the CARES Act, but then after the CARES Act, this website got opened. And this allowed people to apply very quickly, but in turn it means the SBA got flooded with applications very quickly. So the actual loan advance, this is something that was added with the CARES Act. This is the point where it became available. So people who applied for SBA loans prior to that new portal being opened would have had to have reapplied through the EIDL portal and checked off the box to be considered for the grant, which is the loan advance as the SBA is calling it. From the standpoint of the actual CARES Act, it's effectively a grant. So that's how you would actually apply for these grants. And that's one of the big things that the SBA is actually in some hot water over. We're going to talk about that here too. So as far as the advance still being available, that is another thing that's going to be contingent on the availability of this application. Right now there's no application, and since there's no application, there's no way to really apply for the grant. That said, if the application becomes available again, then unless something else changes, then yes, you'll be able to apply for EIDL as well as request the advance at that time. But at the time of recording this video, I checked the site literally before I started filming, and it's still not open yet. We thought maybe it might be open late last week, early this week, but that hasn't happened yet, so we're just going to have to keep an eye on it. Now, speaking of which, I do want to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on the back end with the SBA. The SBA is actually being sued over these grants. And there's a couple reasons for this. It mainly has to do with the original wording of the legislation. The loan advance, the grant, would be dispersed within 3 days of a successful application. Now, if you're like many people, you've completed a successful application, you have the application number to show for it. That being said, you never actually got your loan advance, and if you did, you probably didn't get $10,000, which leads to the other reason the SBA is in some hot water. When this first came out, it was supposed to be a straight $10,000. There were some ancillary sources that we found that indicated they were going to break it up by employee back then, but then a couple of weeks after that, the SBA officially announced that the amount of the grant will be based on the number of employees that you have. So if you only have one employee, which many in real estate only have one or maybe up to 3 employees, then the amount of your grant is going to be based off of that. So most people are only going to see $1,000, and that's if they get anything. And that said, most people who are still waiting on this applied weeks ago, so we're well over that 3-day mark. So there has been a lawsuit filed about the SBA. We're not going to talk too much about it yet because it's a new thing, and you never know, it could just get thrown out. With class actions like this, I could see this being the sort of thing where everyone who applied ends up being eligible to join the lawsuit. So if we find out something like that's going on, we'll definitely bring an update on it.
Ooh, somebody here to crash my video. Are you here to crash my video? You here to crash it? Crashing my video.
She's smart enough to know I don't have anything in my hand. She's just kind of humoring me. I want to take the opportunity to talk about PPP as well, the Payroll Protection Program. And speaking of the SBA being sued, a lot of banks have also been sued as it relates to the Payroll Protection Program. Out of all the government relief that's been unveiled, you have 3 main buckets, right? You have the EIDL, you have the PPP, the Payroll Protection Program, and you have the economic impact payments, otherwise known as stimulus checks that are going to every American. Well, out of these 3 relief programs, the one that's had the most trouble with its execution has by far been the Payroll Protection Program. This program has been just an absolute nightmare to see implemented. People had a lot of problem applying, and allegedly a lot of the money for these payroll protection loans was scooped up by corporations at behest of big banks. Not going to comment too much on that because I really don't know yet. It's going to be a while before all the information truly comes to light with what went down there. With that said, the government has offered these companies the opportunity to give that money back with no penalty. So hopefully that will bring some of the funding back to the Payroll Protection Program. But for a lot of people who have been applying, it's hard to even find a lender who's doing these loans, let alone get approved for it. Some people have had luck with it. This has been one of the roughest things for them to execute on. Now, we do have a similar question for this as we had for EIDL, which is can contractors apply? And the answer, again, is yes. The payroll protection loans were open to bigger companies first, I believe, and then it was a while after that it was opened up to the contractors. And that just happened to fall around the same time that the payroll protection program ran out of money. So funny how that goes. But as of right now, as far as we can tell, yes, if you can find a bank that will do a payroll protection loan for you and you're a contractor, if they're willing to work with you, you should be able to apply for that loan. A few people have also asked which banks are going to be best for payroll protection loans. And I got to be I truly don't have an answer for this. And the reason why is, like I said, this has been a very rough program to execute on. There's just been a lot of problems with it. I know Wells Fargo was one of the banks that was offering these loans, but the money ran out very fast. The application program was very rocky. And again, a lot of the funding, we believe, was taken by large companies who probably didn't need it. So in terms of what bank I recommend you going to, as far as we can tell, the only thing that's going to give you any kind of an edge in terms of what bank you choose is going to be if you have an existing relationship with that bank. So if you bank with Wells Fargo, that's probably going to be the best bank for you to approach to try and get one of these payroll protection loans. So we'll also talk about the stimulus checks, aka the economic impact payments, as they're officially being called. So as you already know, these are going to be based on your income. If you're single and make less than $75,000 a year, or if you're married and make less than a collective $150,000 a year on a joint return, then you would qualify for one of these impact payments. It's $1,200 for single, $2,400 for married, with an additional $500 per child. This, of course, being based on your tax return. Now, one question that's come up that we've addressed before, but I'll address it real quick here, is whether or not the priority is being placed on people who filed 2019 returns. Now, I can't necessarily confirm this, but we have noticed that people who already filed 2019 do seem to be getting these a little bit faster. So if you filed 2018 and you're not planning on doing 2019 anytime soon, that's not the end of the world, but there's definitely a potential here that you're going to wait a little bit longer to get your payment. That said, tax returns aside, there's a portal open to enter direct deposit information if the IRS doesn't already have it, so that they can give you your economic impact payment that way. That is by far going to be the fastest way to do it. Eventually, a paper check will be mailed out, but these are expected to stretch into September as far as getting them all out, so So if you want to get this payment quickly, you're definitely going to want to submit direct deposit information to the IRS. Just make sure you're doing it on the official IRS website. There have been some scams supposedly going around, so you want to make sure that you're on the official IRS website, which is irs.gov. That's not to say there aren't good sources for tax information out there that aren't the IRS website. In some cases, there are legitimate websites where you can say pay your taxes, like there's pay1040.com, which is how people can pay through credit cards. But these economic impact payments, the only place to enter your direct deposit information is the official IRS website. Now, the most recent question being raised about this is whether or not there's going to be more stimulus checks. The existing economic impact payment program is just a one-time payment. So everyone gets one payment, you get your payment, it's done. There's a few things in the works right now, and it's too early to tell exactly what the final product would look like. House Democrats have attempted to introduce a bill. It would be offering people $2,000 a month ongoing through a money card the government sends you. At least that's the working concept. Now, I gotta just be perfectly frank with everyone, I really don't see something like that making it through. Aside from the fact that something like that isn't going to vibe well with the Republican-controlled Senate and Republican-controlled White House, the cost of just the existing stimulus bills that we've passed to date is pretty extreme, and there's a lot of concern about inflation or even hyperinflation happening because of all this money that we're handing out. Now remember, the average if you're filing single, you're only getting a one-time payment of $1,200 from the existing stimulus bill. So try to imagine giving all those people $2,000 a month, even for 6 months. And the language of this bill so far is actually very vague, to where there aren't a lot of qualifying factors to be able to get these ongoing checks. This would be something that they're just giving out for the foreseeable future. So it's way too early to tell. I would expect it to be no less than a few weeks before we see any significant developments on this. And along the way, we're going to see it probably go through some major changes before it gets to the point where it's going to become law. Will there be more stimulus payments? It's a very good possibility. I wouldn't say for sure at this point, though. I would say if we see a second round of outbreak that we're more likely to see more stimulus checks. We might see something on the way out of this initial wave, but most likely it's going to be another one-time payment. Now, this is purely speculation on my part, but I have to look at what's going to be realistic from a budget standpoint. And this existing stimulus already costs us a lot of money. So if we do another stimulus, we're going to have to weather another hit. And in the end, we're all going to end up paying for this sooner or later anyway. So we have some letters that people have sent in. I want to respond to some of these directly, and some of these are really good. So keep sending in your questions. We like that, and we like being able to help you with the things that are really on your mind. I'm good at kind of figuring out what you're going to want to know, but no one can tell me what you want to know better than you. So tell me what you want to know, and I'll figure it out for you. This is a really big chair. I feel like this chair is meant for two people to sit in, like seriously. So the first question comes from Debbie. Daniel, with the new funding program for payroll, do I have to reapply if we applied 4+ weeks ago? I have an application confirmation number. I only applied for payroll for my company through disaster loan assistance, but I haven't heard anything else from them and was only emailed the confirmation number. The confirmation just says you will be notified when we are processing your application. So Debbie, just for the purpose of answering this question, I'm going to assume you're speaking from the standpoint of EIDL. Disaster loan assistance, that may be something else that you're referring to. For the purposes of answering this question, we're going to give this from the perspective of EIDL. So putting this into that context, if you applied for EIDL, you would have immediately gotten a confirmation number upon submitting your application. The page probably would have said something like, hey, print this out for your records, and hopefully that's something that you did. So the question here is whether or not she has to reapply. I addressed this a bit during the main Q&A, but the answer is if you already applied for an SBA disaster loan before the new portal existed, so the streamlined portal where there isn't a bunch of paperwork, that new one, if you applied before that and you didn't apply through the streamlined portal and you specifically want to get the loan advance, then the answer is actually yes. You have to reapply and check that box to be eligible for that grant. Now, with that said, if you already applied through that streamlined system, then all you really need to do is hold on to your application number. As I mentioned during the Q&A, a lot of people applied a long time ago and still haven't seen anything from this. So if you're out there and you're watching this and you applied 4 weeks ago and you have a confirmation number from back then, just know that you're not alone in that. A lot of people are still waiting to hear back on it, and all we can really do is wait. This is supposed to be first come, first serve, so logically speaking, if you go and you reapply now, you're just throwing another application on the top of the stack. Meanwhile, the SBA is all the way down here at the bottom working their way up. So if your application's down here somewhere, and then you throw another one on top of the stack, not only could those two applications conflict with one another, but it's on the top of the stack. You're most likely going to hear back on your existing application before you'd ever hear back on a new one. So Debbie, thanks for that great question. I hope that helped a lot of other people as well. So Michael wrote and asked if the SBA is going to be using credit scores on these loans. That's another great question. I actually spoke to the SBA about this really early on when this first started. And yes, the SBA is going to pull your credit if you apply for one of these loans. You should expect to see a credit pull when they're processing your application. Now, that being said, based on my conversations with the SBA, they're not being too stingy about who gets these loans based on their credit score. If your credit's really bad, like below 650, maybe below 600, you might have a problem. Additionally, I've been told that a lot of people got declined because they just had too much outstanding credit already. So even if you have a decent score, if you have a bunch of loans already that aren't paid back yet, you have a higher probability of being turned down for one of these loans. But just to answer the baseline question, yes, the SBA is going to pull your credit, and the credit score will be a factor in whether or not you get one of these loans. So Kimberly asks, where do sole proprietors apply for the loan without a business checking account? So many realtors in my office are in this situation. Kimberly, you and your office are definitely not alone in this. A lot of people have wondered the same thing, and from what we gathered, you would just apply the way you normally would. If you only have a social security number and you only have a personal bank account, well, those two things line up. So as I mentioned during the Q&A, you would apply for this the same way you would apply for the EIDL normally. The problem you're going to run into now is there's just no application portal for you to apply through. So if you're in that situation, bookmark the portal and watch it on a daily basis. As soon as it reopens, you got to get your application in, because when it does reopen, I don't see it staying open for more than a week. So Holly writes and asks, will either loans have to be paid back? What are the risks? So Holly, this is actually a great question. I'm glad you brought up the risk factor. When we do tax planning, risk assessment is actually a big part of that. So risk assessment is definitely something you need to do when you're deciding on these loans. So to answer your first question, will either loans have to be paid back? When you say either, I'm assuming you're referring to EIDL and Payroll Protection Program. So with the EIDL is the loan advance is a grant. So if you get the loan advance of up to $10,000, that doesn't have to be repaid. And that's whether or not you actually get a loan on top of that. But the EIDL loan itself is a loan. It has to be paid back. Now, by extension, the payroll protection loans are also loans, but there are criteria for it to be forgivable. If the majority of the money is used on certain qualified expenses, such as paying payroll, then the loan could potentially be forgivable and you wouldn't have to pay it back. Now, to do really risk assessment on this, I don't see a terrible amount of risk with applying for any of these loans. I mean, if you take a hit to your credit from your credit being pulled, that's probably the only real drawback. So you will have to accept that. But as the credit experts know, a credit pull isn't the same as missing a credit card payment, so it's hardly the end of the world. That said, if you if you take out a non-forgivable loan, such as economic injury disaster, even though it's a low-interest loan, it's still a loan. So you have to pay it back, and there's going to be interest expense associated there. And there is a very real risk there. I mean, you could take out a loan for a good amount of money and say, okay, I'm going to run my business off of this for the next year, and by the time all this is said and done, I'll be fine. But then maybe business doesn't go as well as you think it's going to, and you end up burning through all the loan money. And so now you can't. And so now you're responsible to pay it back, but you don't have it anymore. And because you didn't do a lot of business, you kind of didn't make up for the difference. So I mean, is there a risk of, I guess, to put it very bluntly, being destitute? I mean, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, there's a small risk there. But in terms of just applying and not necessarily signing for a loan, I suppose the only real risk would just be the small hit to your credit. And if you're willing to accept that, then, I mean, apply. It's not going to kill you. The last letter I want to answer here on the video comes from Stuart. Here on the East Coast, I hear a lot of people who got cut off due to insufficient funding. Are the states getting proportional funding to the number of businesses impacted, or is it divided by 50? This is a great question, and it's hard for me to really answer that. Knowing the inner workings of the SBA's financial records is kind of difficult. That being said, I have some speculation on this. As far as it being divided between all the states equally, I could see that. I could also see it being proportionate to a variety of other numerical factors, such as the population of that state or the average income of that state, or a whole lot of things. That said, the general idea here that we can look up is this is supposed to be first come, first served money. Now, something that's worth noting here is that historically the SBA is usually offering programs within a certain number of states at a time. They don't typically offer loans in all 50 states at once like they do now. This is actually a first for them in that regard. So, as far as how they're distributing the money goes, if it's first come, first served, then the state of residence shouldn't be a major factor, at least based on what we know right now. That said, there have been a lot of inconsistencies on how the SBA's handled this entire thing, and we went over some of them during the Q&A. So I would consider it possible that state is a factor. In what, now, is it divided by straight 50, or is it proportionate to something else? That I definitely don't know. But I would consider it within the realm of possibility, and it's a great question that Stuart brings up, so I thought I'd address it here on the video. So that wraps up everything we had for this mail corner segment, I guess I'm going to call it. Maybe in the future we'll do something fun with this. We'll do like a hate mail corner or something and look at some of the fun stuff that people send me from time to time. But I really want to keep this focused on answering your questions. Again, like, I can talk to enough people in real estate on a regular basis that I have a pretty good idea as to what people want to know about. And I base a lot of my content off that. It's like, what do people want to know? What's hot right now? What are the most confusing parts of the new relief bills, and how can I alleviate that confusion? That's usually the angle I come from when I come up with content that I plan to put on a video or an email or a blog post. That being said, it's my perception of what you want and what you actually want can be two different things. So when you send me stuff like this, I can take this and go, okay, this is exactly what they want to know. Let's literally talk through their question here on the video. Now, I will give just a quick disclosure about this. You'll notice how everyone was referred to by their first names. So I'm pretty stingy about privacy, especially this day and age, because, companies like, big tech companies like Google and Facebook make all their money by selling your information. So I'm really big on not doxing anybody. By default, I'm never going to, if you send me an email, it's featured on one of these segments, I'm not going to use your last name. I'm not going to say where you're from. I'm not going to say which brokerage you work for. I'm not even going to say what business you're in unless it's part of the question like it was during this segment. And the reason for that is it's a sacred thing to me. As anyone who's ever asked me for references realizes, I'm very protective over client information, and that protectiveness does extend to other people's information. I just, as a professional working in the financial sector in any capacity, I think it's important to be very protective over people's personal data. We're supposed to be one of the few people they can trust with it. So by default, I'm not going to give away any major personal or identifying details about you if you submit a question, unless you'd like an alteration made. So if you want to submit a question, you want me to say where you're from, you can let me know that. That said, if you want me to change your first name or even just cover it up entirely and just cover the question, you can say that as well. I'm pretty open to getting even stricter with people's information if that's what they want. And I don't want, and likewise, I don't want that to hold you back from submitting your question. So just know that I'm not going to identify you without your permission. I hope this was a great segment. I hope everyone got a lot of value out of this. I do want to do more of these, and I get plenty of questions. So my expectation is that I'll do another one of these probably within the next week. But obviously make sure you're sending in your questions. And likewise, if you have a colleague with a question, they're more than welcome to email info@rottweilertax.com. We also have the Facebook group. That's really coming along. It's a fairly recent thing. I've been doing tax stuff for a long time now. I've never done the Facebook group thing, even though everyone tells me I should. Obviously, I'm a tax guy before anything else, so I have a sales guy that I work with on the back end who kind of helps me plan some of this stuff out. And he really pushed me to the Facebook group, so I did, and I'm very happy with the way it's coming along. We've quickly got to over 100 members now. And a lot of this content that I'm making is posted there first. There's just less editing involved when I'm going to post something in the Facebook group, so it always ends up being in there first. Plus, I can post in there whenever. I don't, necessarily have to keep it around a schedule, which is what you're supposed to do with emails. And then the last place that things end up is going to be on YouTube, but typically YouTube is the full production, so there's bonus content that's a little bit better quality, stuff like that. So if you're watching this on that platform, you've probably seen some things in this video that you may not have seen on other videos. But if you want to get the content fastest and you want to get some exclusive content as well, then I highly recommend you join the Facebook group. Truly is no strings attached to that group. I probably will do private groups that are client only, or I'll do something for like a course that I'm going to do. But this group that I'm working on here, it's intended for everybody to just join it as a valuable, trustworthy resource to get information about taxes. I share strategies on there, I share news, I share videos like this. I share videos that have nothing to do with taxes or even financial too. Like I've done little clips on just like how I make my videos and how we might be able to apply that to real estate. I'm just looking for ways to give people value. So the more people join that group, the more people participate in that group, the more ideas we're going to have and the more value we're going to be able to bring to the community. That's pretty much going to wrap this up. Keep an eye out for the next Q&A as well as our regular video publications. And if you need any help with taxes, give us a ring. Hope you got a ton of value out of this. I'll see you in the next video.
See what I have to do? You see this?